Okay, so we've come today to Stroud to meet Dale Vince, who's the founder of Ecotricity, which is behind me there. Dale lived for 10 years as a young man amongst the New Age traveller community, which was seen as a kind of public enemy number two after the miners in the 1980s, and was cruelly smashed at the famous Battle of the Beanfield, which he describes in his book, which is called Manifesto. He's a naturally rebellious spirit. He says that he's using business as a tool to try and help the climate crisis, and he's got passionate views about the cost of living crisis and the energy crisis, which is engulfing us all as we speed towards the winter of 2022. You know, I really admire what he's done with Ecotricity, and I want to run past him our own plans to build a power station on our street in East London and see what he makes of it, and see if he thinks that it's viable that we can actually scale the power station project right the way across Britain. So Dale, yeah, I've been reading your book, but I was like totally blown away by the drama of it, to be honest. I wasn't totally sure of the dates when I was reading, but it felt like maybe 10 to 15 years of life on the road.
10.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty much the 80s.
The way that you told the story of the Battle of the Beanfield and all of the, what you were living through is like a pivotal moment in history that you kind of were right there for. Can you talk a little bit about, your life during the 80s and what you witnessed? Not just, at the Beanfield literally, but then also those big socio-economic shifts that were happening.
So it was like pretty much the decade of Thatcher, wasn't it? I think she had more than a decade maybe, but she dominated the political scene. It was the time of the battle between the miners and the government. And it turned into a battle also between the government and the traveller movement, because we were a cultural phenomenon that they felt threatened by. And many years later, The Guardian released memoirs, letters written by Thatcher, and she had been planning a speech at the Brighton Tory conference, which was bombed, which she didn't give, at which she claimed that the unions and the travellers were the biggest threats to life in Britain. Obviously, hadn't thought about the IRA at that point, and it was a pretty ridiculous thing to say. But the trashing of the travellers at the Battle of the Beanfield came after the trashing of the miners at Orgreave and those other places. It was done by the same cops in the same style for the same reason, because they were enemies of the state, which was Thatcher's government at that time. And pretty much the life that I lived around that, before and after that, on the road with a growing group of people, was really about that. It was about being part of something that didn't fit, that was at odds with convention, with the law, with all kinds of stuff, really. We were looked upon by the cops as criminals on site, right? If they saw you, they would, chances are they might attack you, but they would certainly pull you, search you, trying to find something wrong. You had no rights, according to the cops. And according to a lot of the public as well, it was a big cultural clash, I would say, at that time. And of course, privatisation began in that decade. The concept of that, which is, again, came straight from Thatcher. And if you fast forward to today, what we can see, I think, is the proof of the failure of privatisation across the board. Right? There's not a single example of it working, and the best example of it not working right now is in our faces, is the energy crisis. The privatised energy industry has failed. The free market in energy globally, not just in Britain, has failed.
Absolutely. And yeah, in terms of, I definitely want to come to the cost of living crisis, but I guess before we do that, going back to the 80s, when you were effectively like living quite a marginalised life up to a point. The authorities were marginalising you and criminalising you. How did that make you feel at the time, like living in that moment in that way? Like, was that the moment where you really became aware of the state and the violence of the state, or did you already, before you'd gone into that, had you become aware of it?
Well, as a biker, before I was a traveller, then I was aware of that prejudice that the cops, for example, and that kind of institutional view of groups like bikers, right, had, which was to immediately assume that you're breaking the law and to treat you without any kind of balance, or rights and that kind of stuff. So I'd experienced it before to a degree, but not to that degree. But I think the overwhelming revelation, really, of those times was that we are not free, right? We are not free not to live in a house with a job and all the things that go along with that and be a part of that future that everybody assumes they must have because they're trained at school to have it, their parents think they should have it, everybody around them is having it. You are not free to step outside of that. You are not free to sleep in a lay-by or sleep in a field or just live without anything and without a job. You can't do that. And if you do that, then you find yourself in conflict with the state. And that's a weird thing, right? How were we born into this country not free to do a simple thing like that?
Yeah, exactly. And yet there is a small window potentially where freedom can exist, and maybe potentially like living outside of it up to a point. However, you were harassed by doing that. Maybe the window that you found as well, entrepreneurialism. Do you think? Is that a little bit of a kind of a method to become free, like to build, actually a sustainable, useful business?
Well, yeah, but you shouldn't have to have money to be free, right? And I lived free without money. If you read my book, you'll see that at one point I had a pocket full of change left in the world and I threw it over a hedge because I just didn't care for it. And I tried to live without money for a while. I got very hungry. We should work to feed ourselves for sure, but we should be able to choose how we do that. But we're born with no land. We can't even grow our own food if we choose to take that path, right? We have to be somebody else's employees. So I think what I've done since then is drop back in. Originally, it was just to try and build a single windmill. I wanted to change how energy was made. I wanted to stop being the person that sat around a campfire at night and said, they should do this, they should do that, and actually be the person that did it. And that led to all kinds of things. And eventually, an adventure in business, using business as a tool to change the world, right? That's what that is. I'm not an entrepreneur or a businessman or somebody that even cares about money to any degree. I'm somebody using a business model to change the world and challenge the status quo. And
I suppose that brings me to the question about renewable energy as a whole. Right now in 2022, are we? Yeah. We're facing a huge energy crisis. The state are trying to suggest, and their news outlets are trying to suggest, that this is all because of Vladimir Putin. But rather than effectively putting renewables everywhere and making us a renewable, which they could do, they're spending billions just, effectively bailing us out of energy debt that, we wouldn't really have unless this crazy system existed.
It shouldn't have.
Could we be building like renewables absolutely everywhere? Could we be a totally renewable country/world?
Yes, we could. So let me take you back to pre the crisis. Let's say October 21, energy bills were normal. As a country, we imported £50 billion worth of fossil fuels every year just to burn them, right? That money went up in smoke. It left our economy to a different part of the world and we burnt it. And then we had to buy it again, £50 billion a year. For 2 years of that budget, we could build enough wind and solar projects to make ourselves 100% powered by renewable energies. Just 2 years of that budget. It shows you how foolish this path is to have single-use energy underpin our economy. Single-use energy made in a different part of the world for the most part, right? Just 2 years of that money and we're self-sufficient in electricity. We've created hundreds of thousands of jobs here in Britain, and the money in that industry stays here in Britain and goes round in our economy. And we buy that 50 billion worth of fossil fuels in a foreign currency, the dollar. So we have an exchange rate risk as well, a currency exchange rate risk. And the price of oil can be anywhere between 1 and 5 times as high as it was back in October 21. And so the 50 billion could easily be 250 billion. And then you've got a currency risk as well. Great volatility, great risk, and a great drain on our economy. We could end that for 2 years basic spending, but we didn't. We banned onshore wind, we banned onshore solar. We shut down our gas storage, which is on the fossil fuel side of life, but that meant when the crisis came to Europe, and it came before the invasion of Ukraine, it came post-pandemic, it started 6 months before the invasion. When it came, we were in the most vulnerable place in Europe because we have 1% of Europe's gas storage and 10% of Europe's population. So other nations have got enough gas storage to get through the winter, we don't. So that's a fundamental market failure in fossil fuels and a fundamental failure to see the writing on the wall. We know we have to give fossil fuels up. Why are we continuing to spend vast sums of money that leave our economy on this fossil fuel stuff and not simply investing in the infrastructure to make clean energy here forever, because it will never run out?
Well, that is the question, and that's kind of where I've been trying to lead this. Why? Why is that, do you think?
Well, I think that a lot of people are just kind of wedded to what they know. Right, and I think there's a tendency on the right of life and politics to believe in big industrial things like nuclear energy because it costs billions and it sounds, kind of tough, fracking, drilling, pumping, all that kind of stuff, whereas the wind and the sun, they're a little bit hippie, right, for people on the right side of life. They're like, oh, that can't be real, that can't work, that kind of stuff. So I think partly it's human nature and psychology, actually, and the left-right split of our world, not just our country. And of course, the people in power lately have been on the right side of life. When we had a Labour government before that, then we saw great progress on renewable energy. And, fact is, all of the climate scientists tell us we have to give up fossil fuels. What are we waiting for? Every pound we spend now, every hour we spend now pursuing fossil fuels is waste. We should pivot immediately to renewable energy, because also, onshore wind and sun need no public money, right? It's a free option. Take off the planning brakes and let us build like crazy. It's a free option. It costs nothing.
Yeah, and I suppose that was interesting. I wasn't expecting you to reply like on that level, because I was wondering if there were vested interests effectively within government and within the fossil fuel industry who are effectively, knowingly destroying the world in order to gather more profit.
Well, the oil and gas industries have known that they're driving the climate crisis for decades. And like big tobacco, they've been denying it and funding campaigns of misinformation, think tanks and groups to come out with climate skeptic science and that kind of stuff. So that's happening. And there are any number of MPs and senior members of this government and the previous government, the Conservatives, that have links to the oil and gas industry that used to work for them or still work for them. Liz Truss took £100,000 in donations for her leadership campaign from the wife of an ex-oil industry executive. So the links between our governing party and fossil fuel industries, they're real, for sure.
Yeah, so there's a mix then of kind of psychology of, conservatism means effectively, like that means an attempt to hold on to things as they have been effectively. Things are okay, let's kind of hold it. So there's that kind of idea on the one hand, which is a psychological idea. Then there's another layer maybe of like, we're making a lot of money out of this, let's not stop. Yeah. There's two levels, and then there's on the other side, there's people obviously understanding more and more that this is absolutely absurd, isn't it? And that they're effectively undermining the very basis of the natural capital of the world by doing it. Mm.
And I think the Conservatives are increasingly against the majority of the public. If you look at the opinion polls, overwhelming majority of people want more done on the climate crisis. They want to see onshore wind. They believe in it. They want to see it. They don't want fracking. The Conservatives want less done. They want fracking, and they don't want onshore wind. So they're increasingly, I think, detaching from mainstream opinion, which is moving this way, right? I think it's been moving for a couple of decades now. People see the problems with the climate crisis. That came home to Europe this year, particularly this summer. Droughts, wildfires, floods, record high temperatures. We've had it all, right? And it used to be something that happened in a different part of the world, or was going to happen in a few decades to come, right? But it's happening right now, and it's happening right here. And I think that's bothering people.
So then the next question is, how do we go from state A to state B? Where right now, as you say, there's an increasing number of people, maybe the majority, possibly, hopefully, fingers crossed.
Opinion polls say so.
Yeah, but like I watched a couple of clips of you on YouTube before coming, and some of those talk sport ones, where you're chatting potentially with that little camera that you had a minute ago. You're chatting to someone, And the media, they say, oh, but we all understand this issue. We understand there's no need for you to intervene, and why are you funding the stop oil or whatever? And they're kind of, you can see that there is outrage in them, right? So while they say they know, they don't seem to have joined the dot of like, okay, so I know, so therefore let's see some action.
Yeah.
There's just this, why is that, and how do we change that?
But look, this is where we are now, right? If you go back, let's say 10 years, then there was not a consensus that we had to get to net zero as fast as possible, and we had to avoid 1.5 degree global temperature rise, all that kind of stuff. There was not a consensus for that. We've reached a place now where there is a consensus for that. Actually, the new challenge is how quickly we do it, because the new language from the ex-climate change deniers and skeptics is about transition. Yes, we need to know, we know we need to get there, but we need to make an orderly transition, right? We need to do it by 2050 or something. Keep making the money, and yeah, we'll change eventually. So that's the new challenge. It's about speed now, not the necessity of change.
Cool. So that brings me now to the viability of the project we're doing, because I obviously love what you're doing, but did you have a chance to watch our trailer or anything? No. Okay, so the project we're doing now is we're trying to turn our street into a power station in London. Yeah. So the way we're doing that is by so the project we did before, I should tell you, is that we opened our own bank, printed our own money as artworks, and then sold enough of it to blow up £1 million of debt that we bought for 20 grand. That was, and I brought you a DVD and a book, so I'll give you those in a minute. But now we're printing our own art money effectively, and we're using the proceeds to put solar panels on everyone's house on the street. Mm-hmm. And we're saying what we've learned. So I mean, we're not technicians, by the way. We don't know, but before a year ago when we set this up, we didn't know much about it. But what we've learned is that if we bulk buy and we bulk install the solar panels on the houses on the street, we can save about 50% of the cost of getting solar onto people's houses. Wow. Just like that. So whereas
that's big. How many houses in your street?
There's 150 houses on our street. We're doing it in bulk, in batches of 20. That's our plan. Okay. So we're trying to do the first 20 very soon. But instead of it costing like 10 grand per house, we're looking at like 3-4 kind of thousand per house. And we're trying to do all the council houses as well, because the council are lagging right behind, and we've got trying to do social housing as well. And we're making a connection between technology and the social, the social side of it, like people living in fuel poverty, people being deprived, like all of that type of stuff. So yeah, we're basically making a film showing the journey of trying to do this. And then what we're trying to argue is that every street or every building could be its own power station, and it might not get 100% of the energy from its solar panels, and in fact it probably won't. But it's a provocation to try and show what's possible and to stick it in the face of the government, basically. And then what we were thinking was, there's lots of other streets coming to us asking, can we help them do it? So we've got a membership site, and which we're making free for everyone to access the information on how we've done it. And I suppose what we're trying to do is to say, this is the quickest way for your streets to do it. But how viable do you think it would be to turn every building into its own power station and retrofit, if there was the political will? Because what we really want to do is have a government that's pushing that agenda, but we're just pretending that we're like a micro-government type of thing.
But I think, we're all better off and stuff gets done faster when the government leads, right? But that's rare. But the economics can drive this, actually. And if you can get 50% off the cost, or get it down to £3,000 a house. Is that 3 kilowatts per house?
Yeah, that's it's slightly gone up because of the costs of China and the production. Sure. So it's like 3,500 to 4,500 for about 3 megawatts per house.
3 kilowatts.
3 kilowatts. Yeah, not megawatts. Yeah.
Which will make about the annual average amount for a typical house in Britain, just over 3 megawatt hours. That's what it will make. But if you can find the economic key to that, then you can just get on and do it anyway. And I'm a big believer in that. I mean, all of the things we've ever done at Ecotricity, we've done against the grain of life, right? We moved first in green energy, in wind energy, in solar, in green gas, in electric cars, in charging for electric cars, everything. And when the regulations and the industry follows behind you, and then it becomes something that everybody does, that's great. But economics can often be the great key to that. So right now, in our energy crisis, we've got a massive overlap between two green things, right? Green is the color of money, and green is the color of the environment movement, right? And right now, this energy crisis makes green energy super affordable, right? I mean, the cost of a unit of electricity on the wholesale market right now is probably 50 pence. With a solar panel, you can make it for 5, right? That's how super affordable it is. So what are we waiting for? But what I'm coming around to saying is, you don't need to wait for government. If you can find the economic key to this, and then it can just be done. And for 20 years, we've been pursuing the idea of energy independence at the home level, using solar panels. Lately, batteries came along. We've been pursuing that for quite a while. They're now viable in the home. Electric cars can be plugged into a house and they can give and take from the grid. What we foresee is grid interdependence, not independence or dependence, but interdependence, where a house gives and takes to the grid according to the needs of the house and the needs of the country. There's something called the smart grid that would oversee all of this, that would coordinate between homes, businesses, big generators of renewable energy and small ones actually, and balance the whole system. It's a different kind of grid that's about intelligent demand, not the one that we have at the moment. So my answer is absolutely, I can foresee all homes being like little energy islands, but connected with a bridge to the rest of the the ecosystem. And that's something that we're probably going to turn our attention to next.
Right.
Try and make that happen more. I like what you're doing.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's really good. And we could. What I was also thinking was that because, like, at this moment with the model that we've got, we can't put panels on every single house because many of it comes down to the way they're owned. Like, so people who are renting have to get the permission of the landlords and stuff. Yeah. And the landlords are often not interested in doing that. Yeah. And also council housing we're struggling with a bit because our council has all these different bureaucracies, levels of bureaucracy, and etc. So what we're thinking to do to have a bit of a social solution is to connect maybe a communal battery up. So rather than sending it back to the grid, we could share with houses across that can't get the panels because of ownership problems or whatever.
Well, you don't need a battery for that either. You could just join a house with panels to a house with no panels, or join the panels so that they could share the output.
Right, yeah. Well, that would be great too. So we're basically experimenting on this one street, and then we're trying to help these other streets to do it. And we're working with a really good installer who understands the whole vibe of it and everything. So that was basically, I wanted to run that one by you and see what you thought of it, because I mean, it feels to me that, well, with the research I've done, for the cost of 3.69 track and trace systems, every viable building in the UK could have that. So it doesn't seem right that it doesn't effectively.
Yeah, I agree. And for me, it's one of the great virtues of renewable energy, that it can democratize energy, right? That we can, all of us, make our own energy.
Yeah, exactly. And that's probably a big threat to the fossil fuel lobby, I would imagine.
And the central way of doing things, big power stations, big grids, and big energy bills.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's really, I just wanted to get your opinion on it, basically. I mean, that's not the only reason I came, because it was fascinating to hear your critique of the 80s as well. Talk about how we got into this, how the grid was first built, like way back. I don't know if you know any like that, because it was a Conservative government, but they had to act in a way that was totally anathema to their... Like
they are today, with their intervention in energy bills, right? That's massive state intervention.
Yeah.
Post the Second World War, isn't it? When the rules of the game changed, right? And we'd been in this global trauma together, and coming out the other side, we had a sense of togetherness, right? And socialism won the next election with a landslide. We had an NHS born from that. We built a national grid, which you wouldn't build with public money, with private money, because you wouldn't reach every part of the country. You'd just go to the most economic places, right? Do the cities first. So, I mean, we've got to get to a place where we balance this free market dogma and say, do you know what? It doesn't answer everything, right?
And there's no such thing really as the free market anyway, because it's freer for some than others, isn't it?
It doesn't exist in the world.
Yeah.
It may be war. Maybe the state of war is the only free market in the world, right? And then people do what they want.
Yeah. But also within that period, where the reason why they standardized the grid was because there were so many different types of appliances and like light bulbs, and it was just pure chaos. Yeah. But Britain really didn't want to set up a grid. They just had to, didn't they?
Yeah, I'm sure you're right. And did you know that we used to burn whales to power streetlights?
I did not know that. Oh my God.
And the American Civil War did the North American whaling fleet in. The Confederates sank it and it never recovered, but they were decimating whales to light streetlights.
Right, gosh. Yeah, I had no idea.
Shocking, right?
Yeah, really shocking. Well, look, we don't want to take up too much of your time. It's a Friday afternoon. You must have better things to do.
I got the signal.
Okay. All right, good. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us. Let me just give you this before you take that off. So this is a book that we wrote about the bank job. DVD, it's BFI funded film. So honestly, it's good quality. It's when it gone in the cinemas. No, it's good. And these are our greenbacks.
That's
and
lovely.
if you roll over that because that's based on the kind of sovereign money that they created. If you roll over that on your phone, it should become alive with AR. So
Is
it's
that
a
right?
little.
Don't you need an app for that?
Instagram.
Okay.
Yeah, just
It's on
launches in
Instagram.
Instagram.
Just-
Thing called Instagram.
Yeah, and that's it.
Nice one.
So yeah, thanks so much for
Pleasure.
your time.
Yeah, no worries.
And do you mind if we just film ourselves walking in and out of the building? Well, first of all, he had no idea who we were or what we were doing. So that was, I thought he might have an idea because I had literally messaged him and showed everything and explained it. But then I did that to his secretary. But I guess he's just someone who must be just so busy and just not have the time and space to think about lots else. He's got enough going on without worrying about what, do you know what I mean? Just doesn't have the headspace. But actually, the interview was really good. He said so many interesting things, and it was so interesting to hear someone who has so much experience of the industry talking about the climate crisis and the energy crisis that we have now, moving into the winter. So there was all of that. Then just I liked his spirit of rebellion as well, and I like the way he doesn't see himself as an entrepreneur or a businessman. He sees himself as a sort of someone trying to solve problems using business as a tool. That's kind of nice. So he doesn't identify as a kind of, and everything he does is driven by a desire to do something useful. I really like that, and I felt like when we explained what we were doing, his eyes seemed to spark a bit, and he seemed to be quite interested.
Yeah,
so I'm hoping that he's going to now look at it and potentially even, help us bring it out nationally.
Yeah.
So it's maybe more than just a normal interview. It could be more of a kind of a chance to actually potentially even collaborate. Although that might just be me wishful thinking. But certainly we're also inspired by wanting to actually make a difference using a mix for us of art, independent film, social entrepreneurship, all of those things. I mean, it's very hard when you put a name around something, it always sounds like, oh, it's this, oh, it's that, or whatever. But actually the reality is that you can do things which are much more nuanced and that stand between different desires and different methods in a way. So, but anyway, I felt like he was really interesting, really cool, and I think the interview will be really useful for our film, and also a really interesting thing to put. Yeah, it sort of shows that we're dealing with the kind of caliber of person that, and the fact that he thinks that our plan is viable and that we can use economics to make it scalable, which is really, really good. So I'd like to chat to him more. So in a way, I'm hoping this isn't the end, but maybe more of a beginning in a way. Just really hope that you've enjoyed today's episode. I'm just going to do something that we always do at the end, which is to shout out to the new members who've just joined on a monthly or an annual or else a one-off way. So thank you to Andrew Durling, Andrew Reynolds, Bridget Wilson-Hall, Celia Strange, Colette Hart, Dave Cuff, Eileen O'Rourke, Greg Brown, Joanne Woolley, Katie and Paul Witham-Denian, Laura Hawken, Lee Frost, Margaret Decker, Nico Lewis, Rachel Bird, Rosa Faulkner, Sian Eek, Steph Hale and Soraya Campbell, or Surya Campbell. I'm not sure if the right pronunciation. I'm sorry if it isn't. If you can afford to, please do join us either on a monthly or an annual or a one-off, whatever you can do, because we are at the critical stage trying to build the first 20 houses, the power station on the first 20 houses, and any contribution is incredibly helpful. It helps us to not only build the power station, but to keep the lights on in this particular power station, and to help us pay to actually investigate how to build it, to document it all, to build the artworks, to employ our small team as well. And basically to be producing this entire project, and really to try and push forward this idea that we can actually change the way that we power Britain, Europe, and the entire world. And really, it makes no sense burning carbon, burning fossil fuels in the way that we are. It's time to make that transition. Let's do it. Let's start on this one street, and let's make this thing happen. So thank you again to everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers. Bye.